A warm welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us this evening here at Metronome in the heart of Nottingham. My name is Becky Cullen. I'm a poet, the rap programme director and presenter of Not's TV Book Club. Ooh. And I'm your host for this evening, so thank you. A warm welcome to everybody and thanks for coming. This evening is brought to you by Curated and Created, Nottingham Trent University's Arts and Culture programme. RAP, an acronym of Writing, Reading and Pleasure, see what we did there, sits along Bonington Gallery, our music programme and University Hall concerts, and Metronome as part of a broad range of high-quality creative, artistic and cultural moments for students, staff and the public. RAP hosts featured writers, book giveaways, book clubs, creative writing workshops, mentoring, masterclasses by successful writers, open mics, performance opportunities and collaborations. I hope you've enjoyed looking at the fab exhibition in the foyer, which was a collaboration between our talented RAP writers and talented NTU Art and Design students last term. This term, we've launched our 2023 student and staff creative writing competition, Notes to Self. Guess where we got that title from? And the next section of this introduction should give you a clue. Emilie Pine is a writer based in Dublin, in the Republic of Ireland, where she's also Professor of Modern English Drama at University College. Her best-selling book of essays, Notes to Self, was the Irish Book of the Year in 2018 and was described by none other than the Financial Times, yes, them, as extraordinary, both memoir and psychological exploration. The book contains 6 essays dealing with caring for an alcoholic father, sexual violence, teenagehood, infertility, childhood, and striving to be perfect. In the final essay, This Is Not the Exam. I love that title. At a time when women's opportunities and voices are being suppressed, this collection of essays feels current and important. Emilie is also the writer of Ruth and Pen, a novel set in Dublin tracing the lives of the two women in the title. The novel explores parenthood through multiple lenses, most specifically the perspective of Ruth and the complexity of love experienced by teenager Pen, who is autistic. It is, say The Guardian, a gentle, empathetic debut. Most recently, Emilie's been working in theatre. Her play, Good Sex, was performed as part of the Dublin Theatre Festival in 2022, and All Hardest of Women, also in 2022, explores women's experiences in a Dublin maternity hospital. With the generous support of NTU's Success for All programme, we've distributed over 400 copies of Notes to Self across our 4 campuses. Emilie has led a fabulous writing masterclass, inspiring our student writers, one of whom you're going to hear today, as well as entries to our Notes to Self creative writing competition. So please join me in my enormous pleasure to welcome the fabulous Emilie Pine. Thank you. Hello. Hello. I told you it was a long introduction.
Thank you. How's it going?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah. Oh yeah.
No,
yeah.
you,
Okay.
yeah. And you.
Everyone okay? Yes, good. Okay. So, Emilie, thank you for coming. Welcome to Nottingham.
Yay.
Have you had a chance to have a look around the city a little bit today?
Yeah, I wandered around a little bit and saw everybody queuing for buses. You know that's a thing that Irish people don't do and British people do, and we're like, oh, queuing. That's an original idea, right? And then it turned out I also, this is a weird thing to say, I tried to pay for something in a shop, but I have an old £20 note from many years ago before they were modernised. So then became this farce of me going into banks and trying to give them money so they would give me money, and I kept saying, no, I live in Ireland, and they were like, no, go away.
Right. Well, you're lucky to find a bank.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So it's an interesting way to experience a city, because sometimes I have had Northern Irish money, which is sterling, and not been able to spend it in the UK. So when the guy in the shop said, no, you can't spend that, I was ready to do the whole, like, it's from Northern Ireland, it's fine. And it turns out I was just trying to use fake money.
Yeah, it is toy money.
Yeah, I know. And then I made a joke saying, oh, does it have to have Charles on it now? And don't make a joke when you're trying to exchange money. It doesn't work. No, sorry.
And so you've been to Bromley House as well?
Yes.
Hello, Bromley House.
Beautiful library, which is just, it looks like you're going into Nando's, but actually you're going into this incredible 19th century library, and this space and the garden and all the crocuses were out and all this, and the smell, right? The smell of books. I don't know, does anyone else, is it just me? Anyone else get off on the smell of books in an enclosed space? Right? Yeah, so it was really beautiful. So it's amazing.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. I'm glad you've experienced our banking system in full, or the lack of one. What's it been like working with this group of students that you've encountered through our writing masterclass?
I mean, it's just been fantastic, right? Because when we were talking to students back in January, one of the things that came through so much was how passionate people are about their writing. And that's so inspiring to me in so many different levels, right? That writing is this strange thing that we do that is both private and public at the same time, right? That we have this thing that we want to do for ourselves, or this expression that we want to get out of our bodies, out of our minds, onto the page. But then comes that point, and that's one of the things we were talking about in January, like there comes that point where you think, I want to share this, right? For it to become meaningful, it has to become public. And that, just watching people, just listening to people talk about navigating that, and think so carefully about voice, right? What kind of voice do I want to have? What kind of voice do I deserve to have, right? Like, do I have the right to tell my story, right? Those are big decisions to take, and I think because everybody's journey will be personal on that. Like, one person said to me, what should I do? Should I go ahead and tell my story anyway? And all I could think was, not just only you can answer that, but you probably already know the answer to that. I think we know the answer, and we often ask questions in order to see what the world makes of, to test out that answer. But yeah, I feel like the people who are meeting, in theory, you described it as a masterclass, and I was like, please don't describe, because I just I feel like we're all writers together, right?
Yes.
Just figuring it out.
Yeah, I think that constantly. And also, I think the thing about somebody giving you permission to write what you want to write is really powerful, isn't it?
Yes, and I would say that permission can come in all sorts of shapes and forms, and if anybody in this room needs a permission slip...
You've got permission.
Right? Consider it signed. Yeah. That waiting for external permission, actually, you need to give yourself internal permission. That's really powerful.
That is really powerful. And we're going to hear a powerful extract from Notes to Self now, I think.
Yeah, if that's all right. Okay,
yes,
so
brilliant.
One of the questions that came up, right, from people who are thinking about writing about their own lives, and this is much more fraught when you're writing nonfiction. Right, one of the questions that came up from several people was, how do I do that how do I write about my own life when it also means writing about other people's lives, right? And so for me, that big question happened when I started writing Notes to Self. I didn't even imagine it as a book. I just was writing about my dad, and my dad went into liver failure from alcoholism, and the kind of happy ending is that he survived, but I needed to tell the story. And so the first thing that I wrote was all about somebody else's body, right? Somebody else as an object of scrutiny. And so I realized that when I wanted to write a book, that in order to be fair, but also in order to feel like I was telling more of the whole story, or closer to the whole story, I had to write about myself as an object of scrutiny as well. So the bit that I want to read for you this evening is a bit from the second essay, which was the second, they're organized sort of in the order I wrote them. And the second essay I wrote, which is called From the Baby Years, which is about the years that my partner and I spent trying to have children and become parents. And the unhappy ending is that we didn't. Although the happy ending is that I'm here talking about my book instead, so that's not so bad. And so navigating that was not just putting myself under scrutiny and my body under scrutiny, but also thinking about my partner in the story. So as I read this section, that's what I'm putting out there for consideration is, right, how do you navigate your boundaries and their boundaries at the same time? The first time we have unprotected sex, it is weird. We try to pretend that it is not weird. We get used to it. We both imagine that if we have a lot of sex, then pregnancy will follow. But the fun and games of having sex all the time pall a bit as the months go by, and I start to wonder why sperm and egg are being so coy at this whole getting together thing. Then 8 months into trying, as they say, I am late. I only notice this belatedly while I am in another city at a conference. I check into my hotel, and as I'm unpacking, I curse myself for not remembering to bring tampons. Then I realize that I should have got my period already. On the way to the conference, I buy a pregnancy test. At the opening reception, I stand amidst circulating trays of canapes and warm white wine, but all I can think of is how soon I can excuse myself and make for the toilets. I sit in a narrow stall for what feels like an age, and then with trembling hands, I unwrap the test. I read the instructions, I pee on the stick, and I wait. Women come and go, flushing and washing. I don't let myself look until the minute hand tells me I've waited long enough. It's faint, but there is a positive line. Holy shit, what have I done? I leave the reception. At the hotel, I do another test, and it's positive again, so with wildly beating heart, I dial R. While I am freaking out, he sounds calm, if physically far away. He reassures me, and as I listen to his voice, I start to believe we can do this. Still, I spend a restless night plagued by the fear that I have just lost control over my life. The next morning, I give my paper, and I don't even bat an eyelid when the PowerPoint doesn't work, because secretly I'm wondering what the hell I'm even doing here. But when I do a third test, because, well, I'm needy like that, it's negative. I don't understand. How can 2 tests yesterday be positive, but 1 test today be negative? I get on the phone again to relay this new news, and a still calm boyfriend tells me it'll be fine either way. R goes with me to the late night surgery, and the doctor does a few tests just to be sure, but they're all negative, and he tells us it was probably a lost pregnancy. The next day, post-adrenaline rush, we are both subdued, and we are both disappointed. I realize what I'm feeling is grief. R says he feels the same. We both really want to be parents, and it's time to stop leaving it to chance. I head for our local pharmacy, buying half their stock of ovulation test kits, trying to ignore the annoying picture of a grinning baby on the box, hoping I don't see anyone I know, and wondering how I became the person who buys these things. As soon as I get home, I crack open the packet to start tracking my cycle and to discover my optimum conception days. I read and reread the instructions. I can't believe that there are only 3 high fertility days per month. 3. I remember back to the panic we were made to feel as 13-year-old schoolgirls in the annual compulsory sex education class. We were terrorized with the idea of getting pregnant, made to feel that if a penis waved anywhere near our vaginas, we would get knocked up. But now that I want to get pregnant, it's magically revealed to me that the baby window is fucking tiny. I start the process of tracking my cycle, and I go through all the phases from eagerness to boredom to resentment. Though I'm monitoring myself, I reject the enforced jollity of online fertility calendars that animate each month with images of cherubic babies and hearts. Likewise, I shudder at the fertility manual's helpful tips on getting my partner to observe my physical and mental signs. Get him to tell you when you seem premenstrual. Well, we're not doing that. And perhaps that's because I'm a little embarrassed myself by some of the requirements. I read that my cervical mucus is meant to be like egg white for optimum sperm motility. Right. Before now, I didn't even register that I had cervical mucus, but now I've got to become a connoisseur. I make an omelette just to remind myself what egg white looks like. And then I move on to probing my own body, inserting a finger and following the instructions in the manual, stretching the fluid out, recording my observations. Some days it is sticky, some days it slithers. Those are the good days. I write it all into my diary next to the schedule of classes I'm teaching. Cryptic signs allude to no mucus, too much mucus, perfect mucus. It's like Goldilocks around here. And when it comes to announcing to R that today is the top day for implantation, I find out that what I've read is true, waving a recently peed on test stick at a man as an invitation to sex is not actually sexy. The ridiculousness of this behaviour has to be acknowledged. In fact, laughing at the absurdity of it all seems like the only sane response. Doing ovulation tests when you're at work, between teaching classes on European avant-garde theatre, and trying to remember not to pee for like 4 hours so that the reading can be accurate. If you haven't tried it, let me tell you, it is both ludicrous and stressful. Unfortunately, my default way of dealing with stress, pouring it all out to friends over a large glass of wine, is not an option at the moment, given that for half of each month, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I'm pregnant. And when I mention the unsexy ovulation stick moment to a friend, one of those friends with 3 kids who got pregnant without even really trying, she pats me on the arm pityingly. I solemnly resolve in that moment never to share bodily fluid stories with my friends again. I quickly come to realize that infertility is a particular kind of loneliness. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say yes to the idea that you are automatically going to get pregnant if you go anywhere new. I come from a generation that also had that drummed into them, that, you know, you're guaranteed to get pregnant. And then it is when you hit your 30s, you realise and you look around at your circle of friends and think, right, you know, there's all sorts of things going on. People who have problems conceiving, people who have problems in pregnancy, people who have problems with birth, people have postpartum depression. The whole thing is fraught with difficulty, but we don't talk about it necessarily. And it strikes me that this is a very brave book altogether. And I wondered if it had caused other people to come up and share their stories with you and wanting to give their own experiences. Is that something that's happened?
Yes, it happens a lot, and it was completely unforeseen by me because I don't think that I knew what I was doing with notes, that there was a moment when I was trying to edit, like send an edit to my publisher, and the publisher said, no, it's at the printers. And my brain did this funny thing where I went, at the printers, that means it's being printed. That means that there are going to be copies. People are going to read it. Oh my God, what have I done, right? So I kind of didn't really anticipate people reading it, which sounds odd, but I didn't. And then I never thought what the response would be. And what I started to get and what I still get now are letters and emails and postcards and people coming up to me at events and talking to me. And it is one of the great privileges of this, like the bonus that I never saw coming, which is that I now get to hear other people's stories. And when people started telling me things, I thought, because I'm not high on the empathy register.
That's in the book as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. And in fact, actually, if there's one thing I've got pushback on in the book, it's people telling me, no, you are empathetic.
Of course
because
you are.
we assume, A, you're female, and B, you're not a sociopath, so you must be empathetic. Well, no.
Yeah, or an arsehole. So,
but maybe I am an arsehole.
No, you're not an arsehole.
But so I thought I had to fix people, right? Because that's what I do when I'm presented with a problem. Like, okay, how do I come up with some great piece of advice? And then it slowly dawned on me that people just want to be heard, and that rarely are there spaces for being heard, because, you know, for good reason, because we're surrounded, and wanted to be heard not necessarily by someone they knew, right? So someone outside of their world, so they could tell me and then go back to their lives and have been listened to. And I was really struck by the fact that we talk a lot about breaking the silence, and we talk a lot about sharing our stories, and that is something that I think that's very important to do, especially if you feel that you have not been allowed to talk, right, or not had the room to talk. But actually, we don't talk about how listening is the necessary part of being heard and getting to express yourself.
Yeah, so the other side of finding your voice.
Is finding a way to listen,
Yes.
is learning to listen.
Really interesting. And it's really interesting that you mention silence, because quite often in Notes to Self, actually, and in Ruth and Pen, there's these moments where there's a choice between speaking and not speaking, or speaking out and not speaking, or trying to get people to listen to you, like in the hospital with your dad.
Yeah.
But then you talk about your students not speaking out. So there's this section. Sorry, this is the page 181. I've got it here. Bear with. Yeah, so it's about students not speaking out, and you saying that you know they're afraid of saying the wrong thing and being laughed at, but I want them to speak despite this fear, because I worry that if students are... Sorry, I'm reading your own book to you, sorry. Students are quiet about their ideas in class, perhaps they'll be quiet about other things too, things they should not be quiet about. If they cannot talk in class, how will they speak out if they get harassed or discriminated against or hurt? So I wondered if you wouldn't mind saying something more about this, maybe as a kind of encouragement to people who might be listening at home, or people who are thinking, yeah, there are lots of situations where I wish if only I'd said that. You know, what would you add? What would you say? What would you advise based on what you're writing about in this book?
I think that the thing, this is really from my perspective, so it will be different for everybody in the room or everybody listening to this, which is that so many of the reasons that we don't speak out, partly, sometimes it's because we're told not to, right? And silenced in a very direct way. But a lot of the rest of the time, it's because of fears, right? A fear of shame, a fear of being made to feel small or bad, or being told then to stop talking, a fear of hurting people's feelings, right? I think tact that we're taught from a very young age is also a very silencing device. I think that if you feel that you can't speak, and this is true for me, is to consider, well, what are the reasons why? Right? And sometimes it's hurting other people's feelings, but then you have to weigh, well, what is the greater hurt here? Is the greater hurt to me by not speaking than to them? And people, and you just did describe this as a brave book, and I don't think of it as a brave book, because I think for me, being brave is understanding what the consequences are and that they might be negative, and doing it anyway. And I didn't really understand the consequences of doing this. I got to a point in my life, and it's partly age, you know, being in my late 30s and not having had kids and having to deal with a dad who keeps trying to die, and you know, other frustrations, and I was just done with that shit. I just thought, I'm done being smiling and nodding. You know, and one of the things I say in that essay as well is that nobody would have ever described me as silent, right? Because I'm actually quite a loud person, and I actually talk for a living. But you can be very loud and confident over here in one sphere of your life and feel completely silent in another sphere of your life. And it will sound strange, but for me, the route to speaking was writing. I could not have said any of those things. In fact, there's some things in the collection that I hadn't told my partner. My partner and I have been together for over 20 years, right? So it's a really long-term relationship. And I think of his love as the thing that actually enables me to speak. But I wrote it, and I printed the pages out, and I gave them to him, and I stood there watching him read it, and then he held me, or we held each other. And I couldn't say it out loud. And then once he had read it, then we could talk about it. But I think writing can be a really interesting step, really useful step.
So was it the sense that now he knew what you felt?
Yeah, and also there was something about writing onto the page that allowed me the space to really say what I meant and develop it, and not be minding anybody else's feelings, you know? I mean, there was also my mother reading it.
Yes.
And that was another huge boundary. And in fact, she didn't read the essay about me being a teenager. She didn't read, in the first instance, I sat down and I described everything that was in it to her, because she didn't feel able to read it.
But she didn't want to relive it.
She didn't want to, and it was, you know, we have done a lot of work in the years since, and neither of us wanted to undo it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough, isn't it?
That was exactly what we decided. We decided we can do this our way.
Yeah, yeah. Really interesting.
She then broke the deal and read it. So I was like, okay,
secretly.
fine.
Another conversation. Oh. So, it's a really interesting book from the point of view that there are so many trigger warnings, potential trigger warnings in there. So you've got the alcoholism with your dad. There's violence against women and girls in there. There's drugs and alcohol, plenty of drugs and alcohol.
I do a lot of them too.
Yeah. And so although you've said it was painful to write and relive your experience, there's a way as well that you talk in interviews and so on about framing or repurposing the trauma or coming out the other side of the trauma. Is that something you were aware of doing? Were you purposefully framing those stories while you were writing?
So it's that to me is a really interesting question about moving, in particular, from a first draft to a final draft, right? Whether that final draft is for publication or it's just for you. The first version of the essay that I wrote about my dad and originally ended with my recollection of the first night that he was in intensive care in the hospital, and somebody else in that ward died that night. And that was the first ending of it. And I shared the essay with a friend of mine whose parent is also an alcoholic and severely ill. And he read it and he said, I gotta tell you, Emilie, that ending is so depressing. And I took that, I had asked for his opinion and I took it really seriously. And I thought it was very brave of him to tell me what he really thought. And he didn't say, I think you should change it. He just said, I think that's brutal. And so the ending of that essay now is about my dad and I on the phone to each other, right? Having this conversation. And I realized that with that as a test case, that I wanted the essays to be about difficult things, but also to be part of a larger whole in which, and one of the reasons I can write it is because I have processed it, right? Well, I mean, I would also say you never get to a final end stage and go, that's in the past tense, I'm done with that, right? We live a cycle as opposed to arriving at a terminus, which is a good thing. But I wanted to frame it in the sense of a life that was going on. And in some ways, the hardest essay to do that with was with the baby years, because I was kind of writing it while still getting blood test results, right? And still dealing with that question. And actually, the writing of it became a crucial step in me being able to see my story. And there are certain things that telling your life as a story can help you make it into a shape that you can understand. Now, you can't change the facts of that story, but you can decide what the meaning of the story is in a way. And I think that's, whenever anybody talks about memoir or writing autobiographically as an empowering thing, that for me is the strongest part of that.
In relation to that essay in particular, and just the idea of it, of women's troubles, for want of a better word, has there been a response to the book? I know that, you know, people have. It says on the front, the Sunday Times think it's fiercely feminist, so you know it must be.
They are.
Yeah.
The experts
they are fiercely feminist themselves, aren't they? Yeah. So yeah. But has there been a way that it's been responded to as a feminist piece of writing? And is that a concern or not?
I mean, we always joke in my house that we were brought up in an exclusively female household, like even the goldfish were female, right? So it was like, there was no escape, and my mother is just total fierce feminist, like no escaping it in a really, really good way. So yes, I also realized that for many years, I defined myself implicitly. I just thought that was somebody that you were, as opposed to something you also had to perform and something you had to do. And now I think I'm much, and that I owe to, not really to know, I owe to a kind of generation of activists, right, who are living their feminism and who are showing us how to do it again. And when I say a generation, I don't mean a younger generation, I just mean on either side of me. The book coming out in 2018, that was the year that there was an abortion referendum in Ireland. And so it came out just after the country voted to legalise abortion for the first time in our history, but also to overturn the complete criminalisation of abortion, which had happened in the 1980s. And I had been campaigning as part of that referendum, and it feels like, and I mean, I know we have a global sense of in 2016 and post Me Too and discussions of violence against women. I mean, unfortunately, we are still having to have those discussions, right? But we are actually having them for the first time in my lifetime. It feels like a moment to bring all the feminist voices together.
Yes.
And so it was. I felt incredibly lucky to be part of a group of people who had been speaking for many decades, and then who are starting to speak now. So
and I think it goes back to that issue of silence as well, because at the moment there's a real, like you say, there's a convergence of feminist voices discussing these issues, but there's a temptation as well for things to be presented incredibly divisively, like the abortion debates, like other debates that are in the media at the moment, you know. So and like the idea of having children or not.
Yeah.
So it's there's always seems to be women in binary positions rather than in a situation where there's some dialogue or conversation.
Yeah, I think, and I'm famous with my students for always saying, I think at least two things about that, right?
Yeah.
You know, when they ask me a question, because
That's
how can we
such a good
not
thing.
think about at least two things? If you're only thinking one thing, then that's rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
Not, like, the world is just really difficult and tricky.
Complicated.
And we are doing this all of the time. And I think between feelings and thought and action and people's feelings, and it's messy, and that's both brilliant and a challenge, and we have to be complex in response to that.
Yeah. Can I ask you, what's the question that people most often ask you about this book?
Do your family still speak to you?
Okay.
Yes, they do.
Says they do in the book. So, yeah.
Yeah, they do, and they do. And this goes back to what I was saying when I started the reading, right, which is about minding people's feelings. So my family read it in draft form before it was published, and nobody, we always had this joke in my family, when my mother was, I'm the first child, and when my mother was pregnant with me, and she thought, oh, you know, I'd really like it if my child, because she didn't know, at that point, nobody knew if you were going to be a girl or a boy, right? I'd really like it if this child was an artist or a musician, or she really wanted a musician. Sorry, Mum. And then she said she reflected on the fact that, you know, all of her favourite writers and artists and musicians had had miserable childhoods. And then the family joke is that, and I did my best, right? and I constantly say to my mother, well, you just gave me so much material, Mum.
Yeah.
So my parents were unhappy with some of the things that were in the first draft. And they were unhappy to learn that I had gone through painful experiences that they didn't know about. But one of the things that I realized in watching them reading it was that there were parts of the book where I had described them in detail. And they didn't ask me to take them out, but they weren't happy with how they had been described. And I realized I was kind of ventriloquizing them. So my policy, my little rule became, okay, I could say anything that I felt or thought or about my direct experience, but it wouldn't be fair to describe others. So actually in that essay about trying to have children, it's really striking that, I think it's really striking that I don't talk about my partner hardly at all. he's there all of the time, but I don't talk about his thoughts or feelings, because anytime I did, I just couldn't do justice to them, and that's his story, not mine to tell. And so, and I also use people's initials, because R, I mean, we always joke about it, like it's dedication to Ronan, so the R, like it's really easy to figure out like what his name is. But so I'm master of disguise, Emilie Pine. I always wanted to be a spy when I was a child. I would be a very bad spy, because I just published the story. But yeah, that sense of trying to, I think, mind boundaries and, you know, still be able to go home for Christmas.
Yeah.
Was important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is important.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love your sister.
Love my sister. My sister is amazing. And sometimes my sister would go, you didn't put this in. I was like, that wasn't me. She goes, you can have it. You can have it. It happened to me.
Wanting you to put extra things in. Oh, that's great. That's very sisterly.
Oh, she's amazing.
It's such a good, it's such an interesting relationship though, isn't it? The sister relationship.
Yeah.
It's a kind of growing up as friends and rivals all at the same time, and
well, we were
being different but complementary.
Yeah, because we're 5 years apart, right?
Yeah.
So as children, that was awful. But because we were totally different stages, and it was like, Emilie, there's a boy on the phone.
Oh, lovely.
Before, obviously, we all had our own phones.
All the oldest in the audience are going, yeah, I know that, and the youngest are going, well, you could have been nicer.
Yeah, exactly. I was awful. But we are just the closest friends now. And she so much so that she wanted to give me bits of her story, and so much so that she gave me the permission to write about her daughter. So her daughter died, and that was something that I really wanted to write about, but was very nervous writing about, and because I didn't want to steal that experience, and I didn't want, it was a very so my niece Elena Jane was stillborn, and it was, I do this because I think of that's what we were like in those weeks. We were like in a chrysalis, right, of just us, and I didn't want to break that. But I said to my sister, you know, how would you feel about me writing about Elena Jane? And she said, and when a baby dies, I mean, it's obviously terrible. And one of the things that dies is their future, right? And we didn't have any memories with Elena Jane, and her hold on life and reality felt tenuous and fragile, but it is more meaningful than tenuous. And so my sister said, you know, please write about her because I want people to know that she existed, right? And then I did, and I shared it with Vanessa, which was, you know, I just didn't want to get it wrong. And she said, you know, it's really beautiful, and you've got one thing wrong. And I asked her, I don't know if I told you this already, and I said, well, what? And she said, Elena was born at 8 o'clock in the evening, 8 p.m. And I had written that she was born in the early hours of the morning. And I couldn't work out how that was. And it's because we were I was in the hospital with my sister all day, and it was just the longest day of our lives. And it felt like the kind of thing, you know, that happens at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, that kind of loneliness and cold and dark. And it was New Year's Day. And so it was very dark. And I realized that was an emotional truth, right?
Yes.
Versus a factual truth. And so obviously I changed it to reflect the facts, right? When I get the facts of Elena's life right. But it was really interesting to me that I had so differently remembered the time of it. So that is another thing about memoir. It is always your impression of the past. It's not the past.
So it's one version of the past.
Yeah. And it's constantly being made and remade.
Yeah. Lots to think about. Thank you very much. I love it. I just wonder if there's going to be a Notes to Self 2.
I've got nothing left.
Sure you have.
I would really like to write. So this is a question, right, that I'm facing at the moment, which is that when Notes came out, another question that I was asked a lot is, how different is it from being an academic and writing academic books, but also being an academic and, you know, writer and teacher. And people seem to think that I was an academic over here and a creative writer over here.
Binary.
Yeah, and I kept saying, no, I'm obviously the same person. And for example, I've been teaching plays for decades about women being, you know, like, oppressed or punished or persecuted, and then now I have written my own experience of that. And I wouldn't have thought about that as a continuum, but it actually, when you step back and look at it, it is. And so if I write more essays, which I would really like to do, what I'm wondering how to do is to write about the work that I do as a teacher, both with students and also I work with survivors of institutionalization, people who were abused in institutions in Ireland by the Catholic Church. And that work, and also the work, I'm a theatre teacher, so I go to the theatre a lot, and I go and see plays, like plays in which a character is raped. And I wonder if I can write about those things as myself, not in the disembodied academic way that it often is, you know, an objective voice, but if I can write about sitting in my theatre seat and people all around me and watching something on stage, and how am I meant to separate myself from my personal experience, which is what critics are so often expected to do. So I would love to find a way to write about the world as
about
myself.
what you're hearing in those experiences.
And I think that's something that also there is a kind of, I'm going to say gap in the market, which makes it sound like I've got a publicity hat on, but more the sense of I'm looking for people who are writing those stories.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Should we have a little break?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right then. So what we're going to do then is we're going to hear from 3 writers now who've all got autobiographical pieces to share with us. Our first writer is Brenda Asimwe. She is an MA student. She's doing an MA in International Development, and her piece is inspired by Emilie's masterclass. So here she is. She's an emerging writer, Brenda Asimwe. She's here. Marvellous. Thank you.
First off, I just want to thank NTU's rap community for creating a platform for me to be able to self-express. But in a special way to thank you, Emilie, for your masterclass. For, like you said earlier, I felt it gave me permission to write and process my thoughts. And I think you also touched on it in your book, where you mentioned that one of the things you learned from your father was that writing is the way of processing and possessing thoughts and emotions, and I felt that it allowed me to do that. And also your point of view that we can as well write these things and not necessarily share them, but just for us to process our emotions. So I thought that was very powerful. And with that, this is a draft that I worked on, from your masterclass. Its working title is Memories of You. She recognizes her frame and head as she makes the last stare from our coffee shop by the road. It is clear they are headed in the same direction, the parking lot of the mall. Hannah is arriving, and Martha is going for her car. As Hannah drives through the entrance towards the security point, she checks her rearview mirror to ascertain whether she saw the right person, her best friend, or is it ex-best friend? They had not spoken in over a year. However, the body features of a person you've spent most of your adult life around get imprinted in memory. She is the one. It's a Thursday evening in early December of 2021. The mall is hardly busy. No one is honking behind her to move faster, and Martha is the only person walking into the parking. Hannah thinks of all the times she has imagined this meeting, but her mind draws blanks. She knows to do something though. She rolls down the window on the passenger side, her foot slowly easing on the brakes. Hannah cranes her neck, seeing Martha approach the window level. She mumbles, "Hi." Martha stops, a momentary surprise registering on her face. "Hi, Hannah," she responds. Her face is the same as Hannah remembers it, radiant. A moment of silence follows before she lifts her foot off the brakes and drives into the parking, wondering what had just happened. Should she have said something more? The exchange was not awkward, but it was outright weird. How do you go from being best friends to such exchanges? How do friends become strangers? Secured in a parking spot, she recalls the last sleepover they had. She had carried a bottle of Uganda Waraji, a gin of coconut flavor, because what's a girl's night without several cocktails or wine? They had arrived at Martha's home, only to realize she did not have any soda or mixes to use in the gin. She had 2 mangoes in the fridge and manages to convince Hannah that she would blend them in with a gin and they would be great. The mangoes weren't good, so the cocktails were a bust. She should have brought wine instead. They settled on a porridge mix. Martha swears on it. Brown porridge mixed with powdered milk, a bit of sugar, and granola. The porridge lived up to the hype. They sat on the couch, talked with the television in the background. Martha talked of books she had got by Ariana Huffington. She was her new favorite author, and she was eager to share what she was learning. They laughed about old times and mused about the future and the women they were becoming. They promised they would be each other's maid of honor. They talked into the early hours of the morning. It was a great memory. They had many happy memories, but they're all in the past. Now they're strangers who say hi to each other in the parking lot and move on to other things. Who prepares you for friendship endings? She says out loud while taking in her surroundings. She's still in the parking lot. She sits still for a minute while trying to push the tumultuous thoughts to the back of her memory. She grabs her bag, well knowing her thoughts and feelings are unfinished business that she needs to work through. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Brenda. I really like that reflection on who prepares us for friendship's endings. Is that the line? It's really beautiful. Thank you. Our second reader is doing a BA in creative writing. He has been a stalwart of the RAP programme, and I am so pleased to know him. His name is John Lewell, and he's going to read an autobiographical piece which is called Breaking with Gav. Here he comes. He's got a lovely shirt as well. Very nice.
Hello. And where do we begin? Thank you, Becky, for arranging this night. I was reading the book today, nearly finished it. Is it Kurt Cobain is in that? Yeah. No way. I was like, that was pretty cool.
I'm really glad that someone still gets my references.
You stood next to Kurt Cobain. You smiled, and I felt as warm as the sun that baked my pink face. The light in the alley was bright, and it sliced the air up into slivers of yellow-white light on your cheeks. My legs are tired. You lifted me on your shoulders using those biceps, the ones you always showed off to the girls who came around and stood in the kitchen. I wanted to be like you when I grew up. I didn't know why, but I wanted to be like you. The branches that overhung the alley caught in my hair, and you ducked, and I bobbed and buffeted, imagining I was on a merry-go-round at Southend. The video shop was out the alley and over the road, next to the Happy Shopper and a woman's hairdressers, Sally's or Jeanette's or Claire's. You craned me down. I landed with a wobble and jumped over the threshold, a silver strip of shiny metal, and onto the warm blue carpet beneath the glowing neon lights that spelt out entrance. I want the never-ending story, Gav. No, I only got a couple of quid. There's a film I got to watch. You'll like it. My bottom lip fell, and I stamped my feet. But then you smiled again, won me around again, and I believed you again. A life-size cutout of James Bond holding a gun took my attention. I want that. You can't have it. Days later, you'd go back and beg me that cutout, and it would live in my bedroom until Mum put a knife through 007's ribs and chucked him out. You moved through the maze. Its walls towered around, built out of Hollywood bricks. I followed, scared to be trapped here forever. You reached out between a loved-up couple and grabbed the last available copy of the film, and the couple tutted and gave an acrimonious glare. You headed for the till, carrying me in your blissful wake. The woman at the counter had pink and blue streaks in her hair. I wondered where her mum and dad were from. That would be 2 quid. I'm looking after my little brother. You flicked your index finger out like the blade of a knife, and your thumb came up. Your other hand dangled at the side like jelly string. The pink and blue woman was holding her chin up with her hand. She looked first at you, then at me, and then back at you. The woman's face set like Grayskull under Care Bear hair. Her arm rolled out, and her chin did not fall as I expected. And her open hand hit the counter, knuckles down, making a tiny thud. It made me jump. 2 quid. You gave the money. She didn't say thank you. Manners costs nothing. On that day, ignorance was priced at no less than £2. On the way home, your walk changed. It was how Dad walked when he went to the bar after smashing the black ball into the pool table pocket. You held the video case out wide, daring the world to take it from you. Can I hold the video, Gav? You passed it to me. Don't drop it or they'll charge me. When we got home, I darted for the living room, knelt, put the video into the slot. It made a noise like R2-D2 waking up with a hangover. I pressed play. Shift your head, Johnny. I sat on the sofa, right up next to you, and you put your arm around me. The men in the film reminded me of you. They dress cool, they dress bad. You taught me that. Something that is bad is good. And you said something that looks good can be bad. Skipping ropes can hang you, and razor blades can cut the noose from around your neck. And we found that out, didn't we, bruv? But this film was bad, and it was good. When it finished, you spun me on my head. Then you impersonated a robot. I did a weird crab walk. I tried to get my legs behind my head while you moved rhythmically, an electric current flowing in waves. I was unaware before, and I've forgotten since, but I knew who we were at that moment. Maybe after then, the answers ceased to exist, or perhaps we changed. I'm going to be a breakdancer when I grow up. What are you going to be, Gav? You shrugged. A footballer? You'll be the best footballer in the world, and you'll be the best breakdancer. That night, before I went to sleep, I couldn't stop singing the song from the film. Ain't nobody loves me better than you. Makes me happy, makes me feel this way. A magic spell had been put on me. It made me want to cry and smile simultaneously. And it was an enchantment that would never erode. I feel the same whenever that song comes on, but it must be the Shaka Khan version. Shut up, Johnny, I need my kip, you said from the top bunk. I'm going to be a singer when I grow up. Not singing like that, you won't. Now get to sleep. What do you mean? You sound like Lionel Richie choking on a grape. That's mean, Gav. It's just that maybe singing's not for you. Who does the films then, Gav? Johnny? Gav? Someone has to write a script. I'm going to do that then. But there's a director too. I could do that, couldn't I? Go to sleep. Can we watch it again tomorrow? Go to sleep. Please, Gav. Of course we can. Cheers.
Brilliant. Some brothers as well as some sisters.
Yeah.
They're really lovely. Thank you, John. And finally, we're going to hear from Paul A.D., a.k.a. Capo. Paul's piece is called Remorse, but he tells me that's not how he feels about doing his PhD. He's got to hand it in, so we all need to sing Let It Go to him. It's time to let it go, Paul.
Okay, I promise.
All right, thank you. So, Paul A.D.
Thank you very much. This piece is called Remorse. In order to survive, you have to learn to live with regrets. Sometimes I wake up out my sleep gasping, fetch some water for my aspirin. I'm asking, do I have to be caught in these thoughts of past sins, ruminating in my time spent and where the cash went, still grappling with my demons? Windows of opportunities have been closed, cutting off corners till I implode. I know I spent too many nights sipping rums and getting right, wasting my life. But now I'm trying to make things right. But failure is a tough thing to digest, a slow process. And I don't have nothing but time. So let me count the ways I tricked and betrayed those closest to me, all for a piece of this pie plus a broken promise. So how can I look them eye to eye when I squandered their future for the sake of a piece of paper? Knowing what it is and what it once was, poison mistakes that I will take with me to my maker. I guess in order to survive, you have to learn to live with regrets, and no palm unmarked regardless how much you disinfect them. This would seep into the corners of your dark heart, and if you let them, practitioners of dark arts, I read them like Marquis de Sade or by Albert Camus, and reminisce upon my devilish deeds and tweak them into fuel for these beats till I'm out of ammo. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. What a lovely interval. Does anybody need a stretch? I'll give you permission to stretch as well. Have a good stretch. Roll your shoulders. Right, great. So, should we talk a bit about being a writer?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad you said yes. You said no, I don't want to talk about that. So, fantastic bravery from these three readers today. Marvellous pieces. And we've got our competition, creative writing competition. It's just opened, and it's for all NTU students and staff. And people have been saying to me, but, you know, you're asking us to write about our lives in some way, but nothing really happens to me. I haven't really got anything to say. How is, you know, living in Chilwell an interesting subject? What kind? I live in Chilwell. It's not that interesting. So, what would you say, Emilie, about that idea of using your life as material?
Well, I think we just heard that one of the middle piece was about going to the video store, and it was compelling, right? So, the tiny things that we make our everyday lives of we so often don't notice, and it's the act of noticing that makes it meaningful, right? And pulling it out. And then maybe it reminds you of something else that is bigger and more significant in your life. But that act of noticing, I think, is about, it's almost like an act of self-respect, right? As well as self-expression at the same time, because you are saying, my life is important. And one of my favourite Irish writers was a writer called Nuala O'Frailon, and she died about 10 years ago. And she wrote a memoir called Are You Somebody? And it was published in 1997. And she went on TV, and back in 1997 when there were 2 channels. And the talk show host was a very patronising man, and he said, oh God, Nuala, in this book you talk about all the men you've had sex with. And she said, don't judge me, don't be judging me. And the audience gave her an ovation, a kind of spontaneous ovation. And the next day her book sold out in every bookshop in the country and went on to become a huge international bestseller. So Are You Somebody by Nuala O'Frailon, just an extraordinary book. And one of the things that she says in the prologue to that book is that she felt completely unimportant, and she felt like her life had nothing significant about it, and she was just a middle-aged woman who, you know, was in need of a haircut, I think was the line. And she said, and yet my life burned within me. And the record of it is all I have. And I mean, if there is a kind of manifesto for writing, I think, and it can burn inside you in a fictional way or a non-fictional way. It can be poetry, it can be prose, it can be in tiny fragments, it can be really long. It's, you know, you find your form for for the story that you want to tell. My thing on that is that often we think about when we, especially, and this took me a really, really, really long time to figure out, in that I wanted to be a writer when I was a teenager. And when I say writer, I mean a creative writer. When I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s, and then I get to 40 and think, oh, right, I didn't actually get round to that yet. And partly that's because I thought I couldn't write like all of those men who I revered, you know? And it's that thing of like, oh, well, my life isn't important enough. It's not that.
I was going to ask you about that because I had because in Ruth and Pen, you set it in 24 hours, which is a very Virginia Woolf thing to do.
Yay.
Yeah, and a very James Joyce thing to do.
I know.
I know.
Well, where did I get the idea from?
Yeah. Well, you know, they won't have been the first either, will they? But
no, or the last.
Or the last, no.
Yeah.
But I was having a conversation with someone whose name is Red, which is a great name, isn't it? Yeah. And he was saying he was having a problem writing things because he read a lot of Dostoevsky. So what was the point in even trying to start? Because he was never going to be Dostoevsky.
If there is one question that plagues you when you're writing or trying to do anything that you might once put out into the world, might some point put out into the world, it is, what is the point? I'll never be good enough. Isn't it? Like, just... And it's so paralyzing. Like, it just stops you. Like, I would write something and it would be terrible, and then I would stop. And the point is, first drafts are always terrible, right?
Yeah.
So, and they have something to them, hopefully. They have an energy or a kernel or a core or something that you can develop. Elizabeth Gilbert has this great line where she says, on day one, you sit down as a writer, you write something, and you think, that is the best thing anyone has ever written. Oh my God, they are going to love me, right? And then you come back on day two and you read what you wrote on day one, you think, oh my God, this is the worst thing anyone has ever written and they're going to hate me. And the trick is to turn up on day three. And and sorry, that's a depressing thing to say. It just keeps going like that. And the trick is that on day two to remember how you felt on day one, and that there will be a day three, right? Because we all have that day where we think it's terrible. But there was a dancer, an American dancer, and I forget her name, but she's quoted a lot by Madeline Dorr, who's like a kind of writing coach or a creative coach. And she says, it's not up to you to worry if it's any good. It's up to you to worry if it's going to exist or not. And I think that's it. And for me, when I was writing notes, I kept thinking, what do I want to say? What is the thing that burns within me? And you know, a lot of it is actually the granular detail, like describing cervical mucus. Like, I had never read anybody doing that before. That's not literary. That's not going to get you any points. But I did it anyway because 0 fucks were given at that point. So yeah.
Maybe that's what Finnegan's Wake's about. Nobody knows what Finnegan's Wake's about.
And that's why it's circular, right? Because cervical mucus is very sticky. Sorry, I can't not do that, right? Yeah. It's like, I don't go around.
Every time we make an omelette, we'll be thinking about cervical. Anyway, let's move on. So you're going to give us a reading, I think, from your novel, Ruth and Pen, which was out, when did it come out?
Last May. So,
last May.
put me back out this May.
Okay, great.
And we were talking earlier, and one of the things that I would say, I am so grateful that you invited me to be here. It's such a privilege. And that 5 years ago, this is not what my life looked like, and I could not have imagined being invited. I would have come to a university, but as an academic, right? So to be invited as a creative writer, and I say that...
Not for fun. Sorry.
Yeah. So much more fun. And I'm not, I love my academic life as well. I say that about the 5 years because your life can change. Like, we don't know what's going to happen anyway. So I can't believe that I wrote a novel. I kind of tricked myself into it. But again, one of the questions that I think gets asked about autobiographical writing is, do you have to include everything in order for it to be honest? And I don't think you do have to. I think you can choose what goes into it. I do always say, write your first draft as if no one is ever going to read it, and then write your second draft, or rewrite it or edit it with your audience, or not an audience in mind, but a sense that's going to be public. And there were things that I didn't put in Notes to Self, and that I then felt safer fictionalizing. Right, and this is the shortest reading you're ever going to hear in your life. You'd be relieved to hear, but it's a moment that happened to me in the hospital, the maternity hospital where I was not having a child, and that I felt too raw putting into notes, which, considering the things I put into notes, is saying something. But I, for whatever reason, couldn't include it, and so then I put it in the novel instead. Back out to the linoleum corridor and the smell of the hospital. In the foyer, the faint feeling persists, and Ruth has to sit down. It is better, this dismissal, she thinks, than the silence and delay which mean bad news. She leans her head back, closes her eyes, allows the lightness in her brain to take her for a moment. With her eyes closed, Ruth hears the bustle of the hospital and fears she might vomit. Is someone getting you a taxi? Asks a concerned voice, and Ruth opens her eyes to see a woman sitting a few chairs away. She has a baby in a car seat on the bench next to her, between them, and suddenly Ruth can't bear it. She half shakes, half nods her head. A man comes through the door, and the woman turns, smiles, and looks up at him. She begins to get up, but she can barely stand, so he bends to kiss her. And in that split second, Ruth could grab the car seat handle and take the newborn with her. It would be so easy. Instead, she watches as the man picks up his child and the mother leans on his arm, and they go out, a family. And her husband was right. She should have asked for a referral to another hospital. And that was something that really happened, and that I decided to fictionalize, and somehow putting it into the third person gave me the distance to be able to write it and claim it. And I was listening to your reading and how it's she, right? And that she is very powerful instead of I, right? It doesn't have to be I in order to be personal and in order to be true. It can be third person, it can be fictionalized, it can be framed in a completely different plot and still be meaningful and true. So,
thank you very much. There's something in the blog that you wrote for us about reading into courage. So if we don't feel at the moment brave enough to approach our experiences, or we're stuck for a frame or some way to express ourselves, then you talk about sometimes we need to read our way into courage. And I'm just wondering what you might have meant by that, or you could say a bit more about it.
So sometimes so two ways, right? A kind of...
There's two things I think about that.
I know. Damn, I was doing so well on the single answer. An emotional and a practical approach, right? And the emotional one is about seeing what other people can do and realizing that the world did not end when they did it. And the example I gave, I think one of the examples I gave in the blog is of Megan Daum writing about the death of her mother, and it's called Matricide, the essay, and it opens with her and her brother. Her mother wanted to die at home, so she's in her apartment, and there are hospice nurses coming to care for her. And obviously this is a huge moment of grief and loss and mourning for everybody concerned, not least her mother. And they know that she's going to die very soon, and her apartment in New York is very expensive to rent, and they don't want to have to pay an extra month's rent, so they start packing up the apartment around the mother's hospital bed. I know, it's gruesome, and people in the audience are wincing, and I couldn't believe that someone would write this.
It's
and
really
put this
dark,
out.
isn't it?
It's really dark.
Yeah.
And the whole essay is about her incredibly ambivalent relationship with her mother. And that anecdote tells it all, right? Which is that, and the hospice nurses are appalled that instead of sitting and, you know, holding her mother's hand, she's got a bag for Goodwill. And the gasp, say it all.
Sorry.
But I read that and I thought, well, Daddy, I'm going to write about you in your hospital bed. And I don't mean that in a revenge-tastic or an aggressive way. I mean in the, okay, I need something to help me get there. And I think this is shocking, but also beautiful, excellent writing. I think this is writing that is as good as it can get. And I want to be, and this is the other thing about speaking and using your voice, I want to be good. And I think that's sometimes one of the hardest things to admit to, is the ambition to be good at what we do. And I do it because I think it's not just personally fulfilling and emotionally fulfilling, but because I get to be better at something than I have ever been at anything before, and that is by being myself. And I spent years trying not to be myself. So that is the coming into being. But it is also, I think, other people's writing a practical help in that you can, and I do all the time, I look at how people do things and I think, oh, you can do a time jump. Or, oh, okay, you can go from first person to third person. Some people do that, where they break the rules on tenses and times. And I think, oh, that's interesting. And so sometimes we don't have the energy or the time to write, but actually reading can be a very practical, fulfilling thing. And when I say actually almost filling, like filling the well, right? Yeah. Fill the well by reading. So yeah, it's brilliant. So sometimes I'll just try to read, and then probably within 15 minutes I'll be writing. Right? It's just that sparky.
Yeah, it's really making me think about. It's making me think about food. But it's making me think about that quotation, which is Helen Sixu saying, "Reading is eating on the sly."
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
The idea of feeding yourself with something so that you can be generative.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really nice quotation.
That's really good. Yeah. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Somebody else told me. Yeah. Okay, great. So, Pen, in the novel, she's a teenager. Yeah. She's going to a climate change rally with someone that she fancies.
Yes.
And, Alice. Alice.
Oh, Alice.
Yeah, exactly. You'll have to read it to know why I'm saying that. But she's autistic.
Yes, Pen.
So why autism? And how did you go about the process of finding out about autism to be able to write convincingly or genuinely about it?
Well, I hope I have, right?
Yeah.
Managed to do it. And that is always, a concern. But so my godson is autistic, and his mother obviously is one of my closest friends, and so I had spent a long time with him, and then also listening to her and thinking. And one of the things that she says is about how she feels she's always translating her child for the world, right? So instead of translating the world to her child, instead of having to stand between her son and the world and say, this is how he works. And, wouldn't it be better if there were more mainstream representations of it? And then I started to think about that and how one might write that. And looking at the representations that there were, they actually did all tend to be about boys. or predominantly about boys, and boys who are really good at maths. And the more research I did, because then I started thinking, okay, right, so what would that look like, right? How do I know about autism from not just proximity to it, but learning about it? And I've found that girls tend to be diagnosed much later because girls are socialized into ways of, and punished for not masking, or for acting out, or being, in Ireland, what we call being bold, right, by being themselves. And so I realized I wanted to write about a female character who is a teenager, who is a teenager in every way that teenagers are, and has this other way that she approaches the world as a different way, and how then, you know, in a slightly callous sounding way, how as a writer I could make the world seem more interesting by showing Pen interacting with the world. And so it's a kind of creative space as well. So I'd done this research, and I had talked to my friend, and then I got two people who are artists themselves and autistic, and who talk a lot publicly about autism, to read the draft of Pen. And one of the things, and they're in the acknowledgements, and I'm really, really grateful to them for this. And I don't call it a sensitivity reading, because I think sensitivity is an odd word.
Yeah.
Instead, I would call it an expert reading. They are really smart, really good at what they do, and were experts in the field that I was trying to write into. And so their expertise, one of the things that Eleanor said was, she said, it reads like you did a lot of research. And that's not a good thing.
No.
And so
your
she was
heart
like,
sinks.
Yeah,
oh no, another rewrite.
I know. And my editor was like, okay. And I was like, well, this is how we get better, right? This is how we get better. So I went through and cut out some of basically, Eleanor said, it sounds like you're explaining someone who's autistic to a non-autistic reader. You're assuming that the reader doesn't know. Okay. And that was, again, you know, so interesting, especially, as I said before, I work often with people who are former residents of institutions and had been abused in those institutions. And that is a cohort of people who are almost always written about and never get to write or tell their own stories, right? And so I was thinking, oh, this is about a power dynamic. So really, that insight was so valuable, and I'm so grateful for it. And then Jodie ended up reading and recording the audiobook. So it's her voice reading both Ruth and Pen. And so, yeah, it was a really enriching experience to do that. And I'm really grateful. And I'm incredibly grateful to the people who have got in touch since it was published and said, this is me. And this feels true to me. And it can't be them, right? Because we're all individual, but it is in some way describing what it is like for them to encounter the world.
I really enjoyed experiencing them. You know, they're just, that's a really bad word, isn't it? But they're young, the complexities of being young are sufficient, really. But then being a teenager, oh no, you know, you never want to go back there again. But then having the complexities of these different issues layered on top of that.
Yeah.
And for the concerns to be so natural.
Yeah.
You know, how am I going to mention that this is a date, or say that I've got a concert ticket? You know, where do I find the words?
Yeah, I find that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things as well about grounding it is that, you know, not to make Pen a completely other kind of character. So she has an experience of being bullied. I had that as a teenager. The added dimension for me is that in the current teenage world, there are smartphones. And so her experience of being bullied is videoed, and that video is shared. And that is something I feel time and again, which is, I'm very grateful that there weren't.
No, it's brutal, isn't it?
Brutal.
Fancy having a record.
Yeah.
Awful.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, that's us going,
Anyway,
oh, thank God we were young before there were smartphones.
Before the internet. Goodness no.
No,
Sorry.
Before you just had a wind-up telephone.
Yeah, that's right. Just 2 tin cans and
We
a
did
ball of
actually
string.
have a wind-up telephone when I was a child, because my dad lived in, my dad is an island, and he did have a wind-up telephone.
Right.
And you had to book your phone call.
Yeah. Did you have a lock on your phone? I was trying to explain to somebody what a lock on your phone was. So if you use the phone too much, there was this, so a dial phone, and the lock would go on and the key turned, so you couldn't dial any numbers, not even the charts.
I know, and also I don't know where your phone.
Which was really cruel.
Where was your phone in the house? Because ours was in the hallway, which was the coldest room in the house, and you just sat there and everyone could hear you.
Everyone was listening, yes.
Sorry, this is that's my next essay, is on phones.
Phones, yeah. Well, yeah, we can write half of it each with the tin can. Okay, so we've got some, thank you. Here comes Anne Adams, everyone. Oh, hello, Anne Adams. Thank you. We have some audience questions for you. Are you ready?
Okay.
Right. Number 1.
Starter for 10. Where
did you get your shirt? No. Which writers have influenced your writing and thinking?
Nuala Froilán, Megan Daum, Ariel Levy. I mean, who doesn't want to be Zadie Smith? Her first collection, Changing My Mind, is brilliant. Because it was the first time I read, because she was a novelist, right? And then I read her essay collection. I was like, oh, you're allowed to write like this? It was like the discovery of a genre. So I would say a lot of women writing nonfiction. I was in a bookshop in New York, and they had a shelf that said, women nonfiction essays. And I was like, oh, I have found my spiritual home at last. And so, so I would say those are some of the people. And the reason why they influenced me is because I felt like they were kind of making up a genre as they were writing, through their writing. And that's really powerful.
I love those essays that are like conversations with what somebody's thinking.
Yes.
Or where somebody's having a conversation with another writer, and thinking about what they meant by something. They're just great. What a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this is a good question. How do you deal with writer's block or procrastination, stroke, self-doubt, stroke, judgment? Question mark. Yes.
That's me carrying the burden of all of those things. I mean, yeah, the is it any good question runs through all of that. Okay, so writer's block. Reading is a really good way, I find, out of writer's block. The other thing that I do, because I have a full-time job and not a lot of time, I do 25 minutes. So I set a timer and I manage it 3 or 4 days a week. Now that doesn't sound very much. Like if I manage that 3 days a week, that's only an hour and a half. And I always had this like, well, you have to set aside 2 hours at a time to be a serious writer and all the rest. I wrote the whole of Notes to Self that way, and I've written thousands of words of a new novel that way. And steal the time for yourself, right? But there's something about the timer, because I only have 25 minutes, and I really only do have 25 minutes, because then I have to do grading and teaching and prepping and things like that. And I was giving myself an hour, and it didn't fit into my day. So 25 minutes, there's something where it gets to 18 minutes, and I think, oh God, I've just got to do something. And it's amazing to me that I will then write a really crap sentence, and then something I had not anticipated will come next, right? So sometimes it sounds weird, but placing a limitation on yourself can actually unlock you as well. The self-doubt thing, I think, try to imagine that writing is 2 separate tasks. One is the getting it down onto the page, and the second is working out if it's any good. And when you start to hear that voice in your head saying it's no good, tell them to shut up and wait. And their time will come, and they will be useful in the editing phase when you do actually have to look at every sentence and think, is this good enough to put out into the world? So scheduling time to worry or be doubtful, I find suits my weird compartmentalized brain, which is probably not very helpful, and your therapist would tell you not to do, but actually it's very useful. So those kinds of things, I think, acknowledging that, and going for a walk and listening to, there's a great podcast called, I want to say, Write Off, I think it's called Write Off, and it's about failure, and Francesca somebody or other, really good with names, she interviews writers, most of whom are published, and so many of whom you've heard of, like Ian Rankin and stuff, who do really well. She interviews them about, and they all talk about having self-doubt, and they all talk about like having novels. Like Ian Rankin is still writing things that he can't get published. I find that really reassuring. Like, yes, you know, in the sense of we're all like, there's a solidarity in not everyone is always brilliant.
Francesca Steele.
Oh, thank you, Francesca Steele, and of the answers.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Was there a specific or defining moment that you can recall that prompted you to want to talk about the topics discussed in Notes to Self?
Yeah, there
That's a good
was.
question.
It's a really good question. And I think there are a couple of moments. So the first is the day that I was trying to write an academic article, and I had just been through my dad being in and out of intensive care for a year. And I realized that I had a notebook, and I was writing my brilliant academic ideas on this side, and I kept turning it over, and on the reverse side of the page, writing little bits that had happened in the hospital, or bits my dad had said, or bits from my hilarious childhood. And there was this moment where I just thought, oh, sod it, this is the thing that I really want to write, right? So there's the moment where you give yourself permission. So I did that, and then I printed it out, and I put it in a drawer, because I thought it was just for me, and my partner found it. And my partner, because like I'm incredibly messy, and he was tidying up, he always wants me to point out. And he's like, I wasn't hunting through your stuff, Emily. I was like, yeah, I know. So he read a little bit of it, and he came and he said it to me. He said, I found that, what you wrote about your dad, and he said, it's really good. Like, it's good writing. And that was really important. A tiny bit of praise can go a really long way, and that's why I think sharing work, even though I had done it unintentionally, sharing work is a really important stage in allowing, and with someone really close or someone you don't know, if it's like, if you have a reading or writing group. And then the third stage was sending it to a publisher, you know, and shaking. Right, shaking, and hilariously, I use the word hilarious
for
in
weeks?
a way.
You were shaking for weeks.
Shaking for 3 months.
3
Becky.
months, wow.
But I sent it to a publisher who only published fiction, and they wrote back and said, we only publish fiction. And I said, I know. So I just want you to tell me if it's any good or not. I'm not asking for you to publish it, which sounds like really an own goal, and undermining myself before I'd even started. But they then really liked it, and we met, and they said, we want you to write a book. And I said, what would I write a book about? And they said, anything you like. And on the bus home, I wrote on the back of my bus ticket the 5 other essays that would become Notes to Self. And it was like, I already knew the stories. And I was talking to another memoirist, and he said, it is like a volcano. And it just can't, like, it just takes a tiny moment, and then it erupts, like any excuse, and it will come out. So those are kind of turning points. And I think even though that is very definitively my story, I think most people would have moments like that. Like the moment where you give yourself permission, the moment where you allow someone else in to read it, and then the moment where you allow yourself to believe you could be good.
And maybe this is one of those moments.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have a reunion in 5 years' time.
Oh, I would love that.
And see how many people have written their own version of Notes to Self.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm going to just quickly say, if you do want to get some feedback on your writing and you're an NTU student, we have mentoring sessions with published writers as part of the RAP programme, and also you can come and drop into any of our writing workshops and reading drop-ins. So that's there for you, you know, that kind of, and you will get an ear, you know, somebody will listen to what you're doing and try and help you on your writing and reading X Factor journey. So, I think we'll stop there, if that's okay with you. Thank you. Emilie's going to sign some of her books, not just generally sign books, anybody's book, her own books, after the event.
She's going to deface other people's books.
She's just going to draw little smiley faces and things, or other things, in her copies of her book, which you can buy from the fabulous Five Leaves bookstall, which is in the bar area. Stick around in the bar area if you fancy. If you want to know more about rap, you can do that at ntu.ac.uk/rap. I just wanted to do that. And also on our Instagram, which is, Ella? rap_NTU. Ella is the social media guru. And you can follow us at NTU Created as well. So, thank yous now. Thank you to Metronome, for people up in the gallery and people in the building as well, for welcoming us and for being the technical gurus who've made us look and sound good this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you to Five Leaves for their fabulous bookstall and tempting us once more with so many books, even the day before we get paid, which is really awful. But thank you. To our three fabulous readers, to John Lewell, to Paul A.D. and also to Brenda Asimwe. Thank you so much for your readings. Thank you to you for being here. Our next Rap Live event is on May the 23rd. We've got the wonderful prize-winning poet Safia Khan and our student showcase, and you're all welcome. And the final and largest and heartiest thank you is to Emilie Pine. Thank you, Emilie.
Oh, thank you, Becky. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
I think that's it. Yeah. Absolutely perfectly on time.
Yeah, look at us.
Incredible.